Connor O'Gara from Saturday Down South, giving us some of his time. Always appreciate him on this rainy, ridiculously wet, and almost scary Monday morning across Arkansas. Connor, what's going on today, man? How are you?
Hope you guys are doing all right. I didn't realize the weather was so significant right now. Or is this like just the time of year in which you guys usually get pretty hard?
Yeah, I mean, this is tornado country, man. This is Tornado Alley. We are right here in the middle of it, to be quite honest, and it kind of feels like today might be one of those days. But I also am introducing a new co-host. It's Drew Barrett, who's with me here, and so since he's with me, this is the first show he's doing, I wanted to be face-to-face. So I put my life at risk and made it here
we
safely.
Appreciate it.
That's right. SmackDown's moved on to a bigger and better things. So say hi to Drew, Connor.
Hey, Drew, how are we doing? Are we well versed in the subject of Qdoba? Because that was one thing that was SmackDown. We had to kind of break down. We had to explain what exactly Qdoba was, and the pronunciation of it was just all over the place. And love the guy, but are we well versed in what exactly Qdoba is?
I'm not gonna lie to you, Connor. I've never heard of it.
It's like a Chipotle
in my entire life.
Yeah, it's like Chipotle. You know what that is, right?
I know what a Chipotle is.
Yeah,
right?
It's the same thing. Not at Pepper. I mean the restaurant.
Okay, so it's so it's like a burrito restaurant.
Did I do that properly, right? Connor? Did I teach him well?
I think that's the best elevator pitch you can possibly give for Qdoba. But as long as we're cognizant of that, I think we're going to be good to go.
Okay. There's this decision by the Supreme Court, which I'm just started to digest here, and I just, to me, what it seems like is it's just another cut, at the at the model that college sports has operated under since the beginning of time, and more, I don't know if there's freedom for the players, but more resources to players, and it just. The other thing I see here off this decision is the word operating outside antitrust laws. And right now, I don't know, the NCAA is not going to be dissolved or anything like that. But man, it's just more signs that college sports are changing in ways that I'm not sure anyone's quite ready for.
Well, think about this. If you are one of those people who's trying to figure out what exactly to make of this ruling, and think about all the conversations that we've had over the years about just the NCAA's business model, making money off the players, telling everybody that despite these rising TV contracts, they can't really do a whole lot to change the laws because they're amateur athletes and there are issues with that. The Supreme Court unanimously said, NCAA, your business model and what you've been saying, that just doesn't fly. That's just ridiculous, because the compensation for these student athletes in terms of the educational benefits, that's the focus with this ruling, is not fair, and it's not on par with what these student athletes should be getting when you look at comparison to the media rights contracts and all these things that the NCAA has undoubtedly been able to benefit from. So that's the biggest possible takeaway. That doesn't mean that all of a sudden we're going to see college athletes getting paid tomorrow. That's just not the way that this is going to work. But is the Supreme Court unanimously looking at the NCAA saying you violated antitrust laws in this state, and in no other work setting is this type of model fair, and you are not above the law, was the line from Brett Kavanaugh that he used to describe this. So I think this is more of a long-term thing, poking holes in the NCAA's business model, which has been flawed for the last decade since we've seen these TV rights contracts increase at such a high rate. So that to me was the big takeaway, and it's almost a different deal from, and I realize it coincides, but kind of a different deal from some of the name, image, and likeness stuff.
It is, but this decision comes out, just during the same time period that the debate about what the new college football playoff will look like, and the money figures that get thrown around with that, they're exponentially greater than they were under the current structure. Now, I know the NCAA doesn't have anything to do with that money, but they can tell you the universities, in a sense, I guess, what they can and can't do with it related to the athletes. But this whole, blows that out of the water, too. My whole thing is, when you see the dollar figures, and I'm not exactly remembering what it was, 25, 26 million per school in the SEC, perhaps under the new structure. It's like, where does this money go? It's not going into the pockets of owners. So now you're going to get more of this going to players in many, many ways.
And that remains to be seen in terms of the revenue breakdown, because as we know, the NCAA The NCAA runs the NCAA tournament for college basketball. That's their baby, their pride and joy. College football playoff is a totally separate entity, and as we've seen the way the Power 5 conferences handled all of those COVID-related issues, NCAA didn't have a lot of power, and you realize the NCAA doesn't have a whole lot of power in college football to begin with, but they have also been kind of the unofficial, well, I guess the official enforcer of some of these rules with pay-to-play and all those different things. And so now I think we're seeing, along with this name, image, and likeness stuff, we got to that point where it was too much. And that's why I've changed my opinion on this. 10 years ago, if you had asked me, maybe even 8 years ago, before all these different leagues had conference networks and you would see the money generated from those contracts. But if you had asked me 8 years ago, I would have said, no, college athletes are already paid. They have a scholarship. They have a stipend. They have the means to be able to afford books. They're not going to have student loan debt in the same way that I did. But now when you see the money that's being thrown out there and you realize, wait a minute, you can't sit here and preach the same exact model when these numbers have increased exponentially over the last decade in a way that we had never seen before in the history of big revenue college sports. So that's kind of the difference for me. And I'm sure it's the difference for a lot of people and why their opinions have hopefully changed when you actually look at the numbers and why this isn't necessarily amateur athletics of the 20th century.
Yeah, Connor, I'm just like you. When I was in college, I was seeing all these athletes roll around with and had their stipend monies at the bar while I was delivering pizzas for 6 hours a day just to be able to afford a cold Budweiser. But they were using their stipend money. But now being out of it, seeing how everything goes on, it's understandable. They need that money. They deserve that money for how much money they bring in. And obviously the Supreme Court decision, it seems to be a good direction for NIL. The one thing that I still can't wrap my mind 100% around, and something that I think a lot of people will try to use against name, image, and likeness, is Title IX. How are universities going to work around Title IX of being equal among both men and women's sports?
It's a fascinating question without an answer right now, because if you do ultimately decide that you're going to reward this compensation for educational benefits, which is no longer limited. That's what the Supreme Court ruled, and it was limited. It was originally capped at, I believe, $5,000. And if you're going to say that it is related to the revenue that your specific team brings in, then that's the issue right now, and why the NCAA has tried to push back on this as much as possible, because we know, I mean, the men's swimming program is bringing in the same as college football program in an SEC school. It's just that is reality. And there are certain programs that could really face the consequences of something like this. Now, where you would say if the NCAA has actually done well by this is look at all these different sports that have been able to exist as a result of these sports who do generate a profit. I remember Ross Dellinger did the breakdown for LSU last year when we were talking about how the lack of attendance was going to impact the football program. And you did the breakdown, and you're like, oh, wow, only 2 sports, maybe 3, I guess 3, including LSU baseball, which, obviously has a big following as well. Only 3 sports were generating a profit, and the rest were at a loss. And those sports, and mostly football, were taking care of the other sports. And that's the business model that the NCAA has been able to hang its hat on. But if now all of a sudden this money is being doled out as a result of what those specific programs are bringing in, that does change the model. And I think that's what everybody is kind of on pins and needles, and there is no answer to that question right now. And I would hope that there'd be a way to figure all this out. But to say right now that they're being treated equal on campus is also probably a bit of a myth, because we know what sports run things and what sports are kind of along for the ride.
Yeah, we really do. Just try to say that the softball team gets the same amount of benefits as a football team. And both of them aren't riding buses for 10 hours a day. We 100% know that already. So there's really no need to hide it. And I definitely want to get to this because you wrote a great story about it on Saturday Down South. The Arizona State situation, having people on campus during almost the height of the pandemic, COVID-19, and what if the reaction would have been like if this was an SEC school who done it. And when you see SEC schools get in trouble for violations, I mean, it always seems so cartoonish. Tennessee with the McDonald's bags. Ole Miss was just over a hunting trip. And everybody said, how dare that big SEC do these things? but we don't care when Herm Edwards and Arizona State do it?
I believe, Connor, you can use the term brazen with Arizona State, right? Yeah.
It was. And I'm glad that this didn't happen within the SEC, at least to our knowledge, because I didn't want the sweeping generalizations of the South not caring about the pandemic to be out in full force, which they would have been. If this type of thing happens in Arkansas, guys, you know the national headlines that are being written about the southeastern region of the country. And that would have been nauseating to listen to people come up with that and try to justify it in that sort of way. But I also think this doesn't happen in the SEC because Herm Edwards was this like hands-off CEO type of coach. And that doesn't happen in the SEC. I mean, picture Saban or Kirby or even Sam Pittman and his passion for recruiting. Picture those guys being hands-off. That's not a thing. You don't come to the SEC to become hands-off and turn the power over to somebody like Antonio Pierce, who then just kind of goes rogue and creates a mutiny within his own staff. You see so many control freaks in the SEC that for something like that to happen just seems really impossible. And I think that while obviously the SEC has had its fair share of cheating scandals, not saying that, but the way that this whole thing went down is actually really un-SEC-like, and it's a product of trying to go with a model that was way different, and it was questioned at the time to hire someone like Herm Edwards that didn't have that recruiting background. And I think that's kind of why I looked at this through the SEC lens, that, you know what, this type of thing actually wouldn't happen in this sort of way, and just because we were able to avoid the sweeping generalizations, I'm glad that it didn't happen.
One of the things that I really loved about this whole deal was, he brought Kevin Mawai on staff or as an analyst of some sort, as if to here, this is what college football is about. You're going to like it here. You're going to start your college football coaching career here. And Mawai, was like, oh, I love playing for Herm, so I'll go give it a shot. And after a couple, he's like, nah, this ain't for me. This ain't for me. I don't like the way that they're doing this. He told him about that, and pretty much that was it. It's Mawai was turned off of the college football game by this experience.
I don't blame him. Seeing the way that some of these coaches were treated, and I don't know if you guys have read all the stuff Pete Thamel did on Yahoo, and there's been a lot of reporting about some of this, and it seemed like everybody knew that this was going to happen this past week, which is not a good sign either, that you had so many leaks within the program, but that's not a good sign, and that's probably a product of a coach who was in over his head. And if this comes down that he did indeed violate all of these rules that were put in place for the dead period during the pandemic, then this is going to look like a coach who was in over his head. And as much as we've praised Herm Edwards in the past and kind of his mindset and all these different things, that's why this type of thing at the Power 5 level doesn't happen. And it's a shame for those kids who are having to deal with this, but gotta play by the rules and can't be so brazen about just pretending that they don't exist.
All right, we'll let you go there, Connor. Hey, we're next segment. I don't follow the NBA. I'm picking an NBA team. So, you have any advice on which one to go with?
Go with the Bucks. You know what? They deserve happiness. They don't get a lot of happiness up there in Wisconsin. I pity those Wisconsin fans. I cross paths with a decent amount of them. Go with the Bucks. Giannis winning it all is fun.
Sound like someone from Chicago who's an Indiana fan right there. Connor, appreciate you, man, as always.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Connor.
Connor O'Gara from Saturday Down South. That's right. He is a Cubs fan, so he laughs at the Brewers. He would be a Bears fan, so the Packers laugh at him.
Of course.
And an Indiana fan, and ain't nobody right now laughing in Indiana, although it looks like Woodson's getting some good players. All right, we're going to wrap the first hour up after the break. Stay with us on Halftime.